Well, I want to enjoy the beautiful oceans off the coast of Hawaii. There's even a turtle right there eating in the shallows. How cute. But I've heard that sunscreen can be damaging to coral, but at the same time, I don't want to burn and be at risk for skin cancer. So I have some sunscreen here. Oop. It says it's reef friendly. That's interesting. As is this one, which also says it's reef friendly. But looking at the active ingredients, this one in particular has some fun active ingredients: avobenzone, homosalate, and octocrylene. Just those all sound scary. Whereas this one just has zinc oxide, non-nano zinc oxide, which is actually all right for coral.
A reef off the coast of the Florida Keys, rising out of a prairie of seagrass. Schools of colorful Caribbean fish dance through the coral. They have to be wary, though. Predators lurk on the margins. Great barracuda, torpedo-shaped and a mouth full of teeth. They could make a quick snack out of many reef residents. However, that is not why these predators are here. They queue up along the reef, like they are waiting for someone to hand them their meal at a fast food chain. Though the more apt comparison is a car wash. This is a cleaning station. Tiny wrasse in the reef will gladly pick bits of meat from in between the barracuda's teeth and any parasites they find in the mouth and gills. In return for the service, the barracuda doesn't swallow, which is a pretty good deal. This is just one of many ecological interactions that make coral reefs fascinating and one of the most biologically diverse places on Earth. Unfortunately, though, coral reefs around the world are not doing so great. These ecosystems are created by one of the world's most amazing groups of organisms, the reef-building corals. Now, you might not recognize these as animals, but if you look very closely at a coral, you can see what they really are. They are a colony of tiny sea anemone-like animals. Each tiny individual is called a polyp. In many of these reef-building corals, each little animal secretes a calcium carbonate skeleton below their tissue, which looks something like a misshapen golf ball. Each polyp sitting in a nice little depression on the skeleton's surface, known as a corallite. But each coral polyp has a secret. Inside the cells lining the stomach of the polyp live tiny single-celled dinoflagellate algae. These photosynthetic organisms, zooxanthellae, give nutrients to their coral hosts and actually give many corals their bright colors. It is this fundamental symbiosis between animal and algae that forms the basis of everything going on in a busy coral reef, which supports something like a quarter of all marine life. The problem, though, is the coral polyp is a very delicate and fickle creature. They like very specific conditions and get really stressed if the environment around them isn't just right. Instead of going and getting drunk at the bar like the rest of us after a stressful day at work, the polyps eject the zooxanthellae from their cells and then throw them up into the surrounding seawater. This results in the coral losing their bright colors, leaving only the stark white of the skeleton underneath. The bleached coral, while still alive, is now in real trouble. So I guess, just like someone who decided to get blackout drunk at a tiki bar instead of working on that important proposal just before its deadline. The zooxanthellae provide up to 90% of the energy coral needs to survive, and so without them, the coral begins to starve to death. Today is not the first time in coral's long evolutionary history they have been in trouble. While as far as we know, the close relationship between coral and algae formed during the Triassic, just before then, at the end of the Permian, coral faced their greatest challenge. Due to extraordinarily high CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, a period of intense climate change cooked the planet. The oceans had reduced oxygen and became very acidic. This resulted in the Great Dying, the most devastating mass extinction event. The changing chemistry of the ocean and atmosphere would have caused it to appear purple instead of blue. The coral that managed to survive were mostly those lacking a calcium carbonate skeleton, and the extinction event hit reef-building species of the time harder than any other marine invertebrates. In the following 250 million years, coral with calcium skeletons evolved again and have come to dominate our modern oceans, where again, CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere are rising alarmingly fast. Scientists project that in only the next 20 or so years, 70 to 90% of coral reefs will disappear, and by 2100 they will likely be completely gone. And with them, much of the life that depends on them will also disappear. And because people care so much about the economy, this will mean economic losses of 49 to 69 billion, that's with a B, to the global fishing industry. This overwhelming devastation will happen because climate change comes with a set of synergistic threats to coral. An increase in temperature of 1 to 2 degrees Celsius can cause coral to eject their zooxanthellae. Increasing storms and rising sea levels will destroy reefs either physically or reduce the light able to reach them. And then, as about half of our CO2 emissions are absorbed by the ocean and form carbonic acid, the seas are increasingly becoming more acidic, which is really terrible when you build a skeleton from a substance that is easily eroded by acid, like calcium carbonate, which will result in polyps having to spend more energy to maintain the structure of the reef. With such a global and persistent problem like climate change already devastating coral reefs, and all sorts of other threats like damaging fishing practices and sedimentation from the destruction of coastal habitats like mangroves, is it really worth talking about sunscreen pollution and how some companies greenwash their products that are toxic to coral? Like, coral is just sort of yeah, the oxybenzone or nanozinc oxide you rub all over yourself can cause coral to eject the zooxanthellae and cause about 50% mortality. But like, the studies are done in the lab, which removes how currents and waves might wash this stuff away from the reef. It is probably a good move to ban these coral toxic substances like Hawaii has done, reducing a little bit of that stress on the reef. But probably next to the effects of climate change, it is just a little thing that might make consumers feel better as the changing climate kills all the reefs. Among the coral off the Atlantic coast of Florida lurks a massive fish, the Atlantic Goliath grouper, which assemble here in the late summer to spawn. Not all that long ago, the species was devastated by overfishing, and they were critically endangered. But today, because of a moratorium on fishing, they are now listed as vulnerable. Can human efforts, like what has been done to protect the Goliath grouper, be able to save coral reefs? With reefs so rapidly dying back, it is a challenge to try and preserve them, as protecting reefs in marine protected areas is no guarantee they can survive in an ocean with changing chemistry, because ocean acidification doesn't obey maritime political boundaries. In Hawaii, it has been found by reforesting watersheds, soil erosion can be limited and stopped terrestrial sediments from covering reefs, showing a link between rainforest health and reef health. In other parts of the world, mangroves are often the first line of defense, protecting reefs from these sediments. But people like chopping them down for charcoal or raising the shrimp in your surf and turf. Governments can ban ornamental fish collection or certain sunscreens, but still reefs are going to be hit really hard as sea temperatures increase and the ocean becomes more acidic. In response to such pervasive threats, recent years has seen coral conservation specifically centered on coral farming, attempting to take coral either grown in captivity or the ocean and put them back in a devastated area in an attempt to restore the reef. Coral propagation in captivity has been a relatively recent breakthrough. The first successful attempts made at an aquarium on the island of New Caledonia in 1956, followed by attempts throughout Europe. Raising these quite fickle organisms, however, has only been done widespreadly since the late 1980s. In the US, the first place to display corals to the public was the Waikiki Aquarium in Honolulu during the late 1970s, and so has quite mature captive reefs when compared to other aquariums around the world, including this titanic giant clam that is nearly 40 years old and the size of my couch. Much of the strides at keeping and even breeding coral has been pioneered by public aquariums like this, or even by hobbyists with little fragments of aquacultured coral reef in their living room. Restoring reefs, though, takes more than just a few tanks, and with a changing ocean, research has to be done to find a way reefs can survive the century. At one of the largest public aquariums in the world, the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, where whale sharks and manta rays cruise in a tank larger than a football field, behind the scenes above this spectacular curved glass reef tank is an XC2 program with many smaller tanks and labs. Some of that preserving the biodiversity of reefs in the Florida Keys that are dying. Similarly, Mote Marine Laboratory has taken a lead in Florida coral restoration, having returned some 100,000 corals to the reefs and working hard on the science of protecting reefs from a changing sea and coral disease outbreaks. A key has been to try and selectively breed more resilient coral, those that could survive the seas of the future. I would recommend going to their website and perhaps leaving a donation to these ongoing restoration efforts. Building resilience in reefs is critical if they are to survive in oceans they are already being devastated in. Hawaii is also working on establishing more resilient reefs, as are places around the world. Will they succeed? Maybe, though it probably has more to do with the world getting its act together about stopping the release of more CO2 into the atmosphere, so we don't have a repeat of the Great Dying. Thank you for listening to me about one of the most depressing conservation topics. I thought rainforests were bad, but we could lose coral reefs worldwide in just a few years. Scary. Anyway, yeah, I will link Mote Marine Lab's work in the description so you can read more about or donate to their efforts. If you want to hear more about ocean life and conservation on my channel, I do have a whole marine biology and conservation playlist for you to check out. Go on, check it out!